This series was certainly born out of the COVID mandate to socially distance, and it really provides us an opportunity to continue to connect, to continue to learn, grow, push one another, and get a deeper sense of each other's leadership practices. Tonight, we are going to focus on federal approaches to protecting lives and livelihood during COVID-19 with Congressman Mike Levin. My name is Jenny Delwood. I am a proud member of the board of Coro Southern California. I also happen to be an alumni of the Fellows Program in Public Affairs. And in my day job, I am the Executive Vice President at the Liberty Hill Foundation in Los Angeles. So we're going to go ahead and just get started. Tonight's program is pretty simple. We're going to hear from Congressman Levin, and then we'll open it up for questions and dialogue about anything that you may want to ask about. I'll do a quick introduction now of Congressman Levin and then turn it over to him. So Congressman Levin represents the 49th Congressional District, which includes North County, San Diego, and South Orange County. As a member of Congress, some of his top priorities include climate change and advocating for active duty service members and veterans. Additionally, he's championed efforts to expand access to affordable health care, lower the cost of higher education, prevent gun violence, enact comprehensive immigration reform, and protect a woman's right to choose. He's a member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, the Future Forum, as well as the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. Congressman Levin lives in San Juan Capistrano with his wife, Chrissy, and their 2 children, ages 7 and 5. So I'm sure you have some good stories about resilience and educating your kids virtually that I'm sure some of us would love to hear about. And related to this lovely gathering tonight, we also know that Congressman Levin is an alum of the Coro Fellows Program in Public Affairs here in Los Angeles. So without further ado, I will pass it off to Congressman Mike Levin.
Well, thank you very much, Jenny. It's an honor to be with you, and to the whole Coro family, it's really great to be with you virtually. One of these days we'll all get together in the same place, but this will have to do for right now, and I hope everybody is staying healthy and staying safe wherever you may be. I had the great honor to be a Coro Fellow in 2002 in the Los Angeles office, and I had an amazing experience that has really served me well. And I'll speak more about some of the specific lessons that I've carried with me at the end of my remarks. Really do want to get to your questions, but I'd be remiss if I didn't thank all the people that made my Coro experience so special back then. Stephanie Stone, who was our program director, and everybody affiliated with the fellowship. I had the great opportunity to have my business placement with David Abel. Many of you know David. And I had my campaign placement with Tony Cardenas back when he was running for Los Angeles City Council. He'd been an assemblyman, was running for the City Council, and he lost that race. In fact, he reminds me that the only race he ever lost was the one that I worked on. Hopefully he doesn't think it was my fault, but he wound up losing to Wendy Gruhl, who was another good friend, and then Tony went on to win a different council election in a neighboring district, and then the rest is history. Became a congressman, and of course now leads the Bold Pack of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and obviously is a great leader in the Congress, and others along the way as well. The LA County Firefighters Union, Local 1014, that was really my first real experience day in and day out with firefighters. They're amazing, and also with one of our great labor unions. And the Youth Opportunity Movement in Boyle Heights really did have a profound impact on me as my very first placement. So I look back at that year, and it was a wonderful experience in between my undergraduate program in political science and my law school. And I've tried to talk Coro up to any of our interns or any young people that I think are good candidates for the program. And I'm so proud of so many who have been fellows the year after my fellowship, our friend Rusty Hicks was a fellow. I remember well his selection day, saying that guy is definitely going places. And of course, I haven't been the slightest bit surprised by Rusty's great success. And I think he's now the chair of the board. Am I correct about that, Jenny? So very proud of all his work. I thought what I would do, since we want to talk about resilience, we want to talk about leadership during times of crisis, is to try to frame really what's happening in the United States and talk about 4 major crises. Not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 major crises that are facing our country today at this moment. And each one of them would be overwhelming to deal with, but we've got 4 of them. 1 and 2 are directly related, and they are the public health and economic crises that have resulted as by a direct result of COVID-19. So I'll talk about that a bit. The third is a crisis of systemic injustice, racial injustice. Of course, we're just seeing the horrible video from Wisconsin just a couple of days ago. And we're still, trying to get all of the facts with regard to Jacob Blake and understand exactly what happened there. But just a huge opportunity to really try to do some good and to try to make some positive change. And Jenny and I were talking before we joined the webinar, and your old boss, Jenny, Karen Bass, who's a dear friend, the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, and really a leader in the House on this issue, has been so pivotal. And we'll talk more in a minute about the Justice and Policing Act and what we're trying to do around racial injustice. Then the fourth crisis, which may be the biggest of them all, is the climate crisis. And we'll talk about that. And that's been a particular interest to me for my entire professional career. And I've really been honored to have the opportunity to focus on climate and energy policy during my time as a member of Congress. So to COVID-19, we see the numbers. They are tragic. And I think we need to back up and remember, they are not just statistics. When we hear about 175 or 180,000 Americans who have tragically lost their lives, these are husbands and wives, sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers, loved ones, colleagues, friends. They're not just statistics on a sheet of paper. And every day when we see 1,000 people, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, but every single day, think of what an unbelievable human tragedy that really is. I have dealt specifically with what's going on in our counties, in our district, tracking Orange and San Diego counties in particular. But make no mistake, we have a long way to go to get out of the worst of this. And the economic toll is the related crisis. What I've said all along is we cannot have a healthy economy unless we have healthy people. So what we've tried to do from the beginning of all of this is really focus on the public health aspects. And you go all the way back to March the 6th. I remember, Jenny, when Dr. Anthony Fauci first briefed members of Congress all the way back, it was actually in February, right around Valentine's Day. Everyone reacted to the brief slightly differently. We later learned some of my colleagues went and bought and sold stock. The only thing I did is I called my wife and I said she better stock up on hand sanitizer and Clorox wipes. And then I went back to my office, and I think they all thought I was nuts because I was telling them all to be socially distanced and to sanitize all their desks. But Fauci's been remarkably consistent through all of this. And on March the 6th is when Congress took its first action. And we passed an $8 billion bipartisan bill for the vaccine. Now, interestingly, the Trump administration only asked for $1.25 billion. And we had to push to get that number higher to $8 billion. And I'm glad we did. And it'll be very interesting when we look back a year or 2 or 3 from now and we see that vaccine development. I hope that this Operation Warp Speed will yield one or more effective vaccines, but we're making this unprecedented investment to try to accelerate that. Then in the middle of March, we did the Families First Act, which at the time we thought was a huge amount of money, $200 billion for things like nutrition assistance and emergency sick leave. It's important to remember that there are 35 million Americans roughly who don't have any paid sick leave. Just like there are 14 million children who are food insecure in the United States, 28 million without health insurance, 22 million without broadband access, and before the pandemic, over half of Americans couldn't afford a basic emergency without borrowing to cover for that emergency. And so I think this COVID crisis has really laid bare all of the holes in our social safety net. And I hope that we learn from it and that we improve upon our social safety net in a way where we will have another crisis. I certainly hope that it's not anytime too soon, but we better be well prepared. Then at the end of March, of course, $2.2 trillion, the CARES Act, the direct cash payments of $1,200, the expanded unemployment insurance of $600 a week that ran out at the end of last month, the Paycheck Protection Program, which has been a really mixed bag, frankly, where on the one hand, in my district alone, over 20,000 businesses received PPP loans. On the other hand, you had a lot of businesses that needed them that didn't get them, and you had other businesses that got them that maybe shouldn't have. And I know we probably have a lot of Lakers fans on the Zoom, but when I saw that the LA Lakers got a PPP loan, I said something isn't quite right. And so they refunded. And I'm not picking on the Lakers. I'm a lifelong Lakers fan. And I hope that, I think they're playing Portland tonight. I hope they win. But look, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that those businesses that need the assistance actually get it. And that's where we really tried to target the true mom and pop businesses. Then in the middle of, or at the end of April, we had a plus up of another roughly $500 billion for testing, tracing, hospitals, and more money for the PPP. The other key thing we did in the CARES Act at the end of March is we did $150 billion for states, state, local, tribal, territorial government. About 10% of that, a little over 15 billion, came to the state of California. The economic shock on California has been profound. We went from a $21 billion surplus to a $54 billion deficit seemingly overnight. And Mitch McConnell at the time, kind of made it out to seem like it was a blue state bailout. And nothing could be further from the truth in California. Again, we had a $21 billion surplus when all of this started. So what wound up happening, we did the plus up on the PPP loans, more money for testing, more money for the hospitals. We also asked that the Trump administration provide a national testing strategy to the Congress. We gave them a deadline of, I think, May 24th to do that. And what they provided to us was basically shameless self-promotion, telling us, everything is great. Everybody had all the PPE they needed. Everything was fine. And they, touted the testing that they had done and would continue to do. And then they punted to the states, frankly. And I think Andrew Cuomo, governor of New York, said it well with regard to the federal government really abdicating its responsibility and with regard to testing and really punting to the states. Cuomo said, if you're going to pass the buck, you better pass the bucks. And so the states didn't have the money that they needed. And the other thing is the smaller cities didn't get any direct funding through the CARES Act. So cities above 500,000, they got money. The city of Los Angeles got money, but smaller cities did not. Great example, and I'm not trying to pick on Fresno. Fresno has just over 500,000 people. They got something like $90 million. Long Beach, and we all know Long Beach, I'd consider Long Beach to be a pretty good sized city. They have just short of 500,000, like 490,000, 480,000. They got zero. So the extent that Long Beach got money in response to COVID, they had to get it as a pass through from the county of Los Angeles. So, that's clearly not fair. In my district, all the cities are smaller than 500,000. None of them got any direct funding, and they got pass through funding. Orange County, all of the cities of Orange County are less than 500,000. And so we needed to fix this. So what we did is in the middle of May, we passed something called the HEROES Act in the House. Now, this is 102 days ago and counting. And I naively, as a first-time legislator, thought that what would happen is we would pass it in the House. And look, I didn't expect Mitch McConnell to agree with every word. I didn't expect the administration to agree with every word. Far from it. That's not what they did in the first, second, third, or fourth bill. But I did expect them to negotiate in good faith and to come up with a counter proposal. But they sat and did nothing. And during the summer months, for 102 days, the Senate's activity consisted of judges getting judges confirmed, and they weren't working on a counteroffer. So when McConnell finally did offer the HEALS Act, which is about a $1 trillion bill, our bill was $3.4 trillion. It didn't have the votes to pass the Senate because you had about 20 of the Republican senators who were content doing nothing at all, despite the fact that you have a public health crisis and an economic crisis where you have 1 million people or more for 20 straight weeks applying for unemployment insurance. The 1 week was 960,000. Then it came back over 1 million this past week. So huge number of people, 28 million filing for unemployment. When you've got the death toll that continues to climb, the infection toll that continues to climb. And at first, McConnell said, let the states go bankrupt. You remember that. And then he said, we're just going to take a pause. But the pandemic did not take a pause. People having to pay the rent did not take a pause. The schools trying to reopen safely, that certainly didn't take a pause. And the Senate really shouldn't have taken a pause either. So here we are, 102 days later. Now, Trump moved forward with these executive actions that were woefully inadequate, really not up to the job. And we've been at this impasse ever since. And then, most recently, we see this stated by the president, this desire to prevent mail-in voting. And we're in a pandemic. And all we have said is that people should and exercising their right to vote. Pretty simple. Now, we're fortunate in California. We have another Coro alum named Alex Padilla, who's done a wonderful job as our Secretary of State, cares very deeply about voting and believes that if you are legally eligible to vote, it ought to be easier, not harder to vote. Pretty simple. Unfortunately, not all Secretaries of State think like Alex on this. And so here we are. And then the attacks on the Postal Service itself, with nearly 700 mail sorting machines, including 76 in California, taken offline, and all the other anecdotal evidence about people not getting their medications on time and all the rest. So I went back to Washington this past weekend, and on Saturday we passed a $25 billion lifeline for the USPS. Now, I had helped lead that effort earlier in the process, where I led a letter of 137 colleagues, bipartisan letter, by the way, to try to save the USPS. This is critically important. With 70 days left to go, we have to make sure that people can vote. So, 2 crises from COVID. Both of them still not under control. It's no time to take our foot off the gas with regard to our assistance for the pandemic and for the resulting economic crisis. So I'm still optimistic that in September, when we go back to Congress and when we are legislating for the last time in the 116th congressional session, that we will get that 5th major COVID relief bill over the finish line. We have to, because people's lives and livelihoods are at risk, and the alternative is completely unacceptable. So I want to talk about the 3rd and the 4th crises, and then we'll leave plenty of time for questions. 3rd is the crisis of racial injustice in our society. I mentioned Jacob Blake and the tragic video that we have seen now. Obviously, the murder of George Floyd captivated this nation in a way that it has not in our lifetimes. And, I think that when you look at 60 to 70% of the American people that support the protests in the wake of George Floyd's murder and support measures being taken to make changes, necessary changes, overdue changes to law enforcement practices, I think that's very encouraging. Now, what I have tried to do in my local community, in our local district, is to be a bridge builder between the civil rights community and the law enforcement community. And what I have seen is that in California, our local law enforcement, particularly in the cities of my district, they are a lot more open-minded about these changes than perhaps in some other parts of the country. For example, Dr. Shirley Weber was able to negotiate a use of force based on necessary versus reasonable a couple years ago in the Assembly. We would love to have a national standard, use of force standard akin to that. Same thing with things like banning chokeholds, carotid holds, looking at the no-knock warrant. So many different things that we need to do. And what happened is the speaker tasked your old boss, Jenny, Karen Bass, with writing the House bill. And what she told Karen was find the boldest common denominator within the House Democratic Caucus. And those of you that know the Democratic Party well, it's like Will Rogers used to say, I'm not a member of an organized political party, I'm a Democrat. Because we're a big tent, we've got a lot of dissenting views. We're everything from the progressives to the moderates to the blue dogs and everything in between, and we pride ourselves on having that big tent. But at the end of the day, the speaker wants to empower that boldest common denominator. So that's what Karen did. And she helped, along with people like Hakeem Jeffries, and then in the Senate, Cory Booker, and Kamala Harris. By the way, Kamala Harris will be an amazing vice president of the United States. I know it's not supposed to be a political show, but I will say that anyway. She'll be a phenomenal vice president. Very proud of her. So the Justice and Policing Act, I think, will really deliver on the changes that we need. Now, it passed the House. We passed it in the House, and then we sent it to the Senate. And Tim Scott, who, if you watched the RNC last night, you heard Senator Scott, who by all accounts is a good human being. And we can disagree philosophically, but at the end of the day, everything I've heard in my own interactions with Senator Scott is that he's a good human being. He introduced something called the Justice Act, which fell way short of those kind of fundamental reforms that are needed. And so now what's happened is that the House and the Senate are trying to come together. And as of recently, Karen is still negotiating with Senator Scott. Senator Booker is very involved as well. I think Kamala might be a little busy these days, but nonetheless, my hope is that just like with the COVID bills, that we can continue to have that productive dialogue and pass something with regard to reforming the law enforcement system sometime in September. You got to be a card-carrying optimist in this business. The fourth and the existential crisis is the climate crisis. Now, I sit on two committees. One is the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. I'm one of 9 Democrats on there, and one of 3 Californians and 3 freshmen on the committee. And there's 6 Republicans as well. And what the committee did was pull together all of the best ideas in Congress and come up with an action plan commensurate with the science. Commensurate with the science. So important that the result of all these policies that we are proposing actually meet the scientific challenge of reducing greenhouse gas emissions enough where we can save this planet. And at the same time, we're going to create millions of jobs and really lead in the clean energy economy in the 21st century. I am absolutely convinced that in 20 or 30 years' time, we will be using an entirely different suite of technologies, some of which haven't even been invented yet, to move goods, to move people, to build buildings, to generate electricity, and to grow food. It will all need to be invented and manufactured and deployed. The question that I think we all have to ask ourselves is whether that innovation, whether that manufacturing, whether that economic opportunity will happen here in the United States, or whether it will happen in China, or whether it happened in another country. We have the opportunity to lead on this, just as we have led with every other industrial revolution in modern American history. whether IT, biotechnology, you name it. We must lead on the clean energy revolution as well. And I'm very proud of our Select Committee report. You can read it at climatecrisis.house.gov. And I hope you do. It's 500 pages plus, but you can also read the executive summary if you don't have time to read 500 pages. I am proud that 7 of my bills made it into the report, including our Public Lands Renewable Energy Development Act, our Zero Emission Vehicles Act that I'm doing with Jeff Merkley, Senator Merkley. That bill would create a pathway to 100% zero emission transportation in the United States by 2035 among of new car sales, and eventually we'll get to the fleet as a whole. But we need to do a lot of what we're already doing in California. And what I don't want to see happen is I don't want to see people fall into this trap of saying that the recent blackouts that we've experienced mean we should just go back to fossil fuels, to things as they were. The climate crisis still exists. What it means is we're going to have to get smart about planning, smart about investing in utility scale storage. We're going to need something like between 12 and 25 gigawatts of utility scale storage in California to be able to supplement the intermittent renewables from solar and wind. And at the same time, the other thing I'm trying to do, because I have the San Onofre nuclear generating station in my district, is trying to figure out what we're going to do about the nation's nuclear waste, because we lack a comprehensive plan to deal with it across the United States. But what I have done is introduce legislation that says for all of the nation's nuclear waste, prioritize moving the waste first that has the highest population density and the highest seismic risk. And guess what? We win. Normally, I don't mind being number one, but this time I do, because we've got 8.3 million people within 50 miles of San Onofre, and we've got 2 active earthquake faults. And if that were to happen, it would impact the entire Los Angeles region. So we can't let that happen. Last thing, I look back at my Coro experience and I said, what were the lessons that I really gleaned from it? And here's what I wrote down. The experiential nature of the fellowship. So rely on learned experience. Check the evidence. As my friend Katie Porter said at the hearing yesterday, read the instructions. She did a great job at that hearing. Number 3, delay judgment. Not always easy to do, but in my line of work, you always want to, you don't want to make quick judgments about people and their motives. You might disagree with their conclusions, but you don't want to try to prejudge their motives. Number 4, seek corroboration. Very true as well. Hold emotion in check. A lot of my colleagues could do a better job of that. Seek other opinions. Practice non-judgmental listening. All that applies to my work every single day. In fact, even the 4WH questioning, getting to the point, not asking yes or no questions. I probably drive my staff nuts with this. They don't even know that I'm doing it. But my point is, for those who went through the program, it's sort of ingrained in your way of dealing with problems, dealing with challenges. So I'm grateful for that training opportunity all the way back in 2002. So thank you, Jenny. With that, happy to take the questions. Thanks for everyone for making some time. And I look forward to seeing you all in person one of these days.
All right, thank you. We're giving you the webinar applause. I know you can't see everybody, but I'll do the finger tinkle here. Let's go to Q&A. Thank you so much for the framing and dialogue here. We have a couple questions already in the Q&A. One is from Jacob. He's asking, is public health or the economy more important at this point from your perspective, and your perspective on both the way that you're thinking about it as well as how Congress is thinking about it?
Well, I think it's, from my perspective, you cannot have a healthy economy unless you have public health, unless you have healthy people. So the only way we're going to really fix our economy in the wake of this virus is to crush this virus. And so I think, obviously, we have to be mindful of both crises, but the economy simply will not bounce back unless we've got the virus under control. And if you want evidence of that, just look at the last 6 months, and compare what's happened in the United States with what's happened in South Korea or some other of the developed nations that were able to get a better handle on the virus early. I wish that the president would have declared an emergency a month before. I wish that a lot of the things we did very early would have been done even earlier. There'll be plenty of time for us to go back and understand what went wrong and how it could be done differently. There've been plenty that has been written, even documentaries. There was a great Frontline documentary on PBS. It's called "What Went Wrong," and people can check that out if they're interested. But at the end of the day, let's learn from our mistakes. Let's follow the public health recommendations, and I think Governor Newsom will do that. I think that the other thing we've learned is California is an incredibly diverse state, and every county among the 58 counties has its own politics, has its own competing interests, and I think it's a very difficult state. It's like a nation state for that reason. It's been challenging. But at the end of the day, if we could just wear masks, socially distance, wash our hands, follow the basic rules in our lives, I think we'd be a lot better off. So count me among those who listens and trusts the epidemiologists. We've now had, I think, close to 50 virtual town halls, probably in the 40s, with epidemiologists. I'm really honored. I have UC San Diego in my district, some of the best public health experts in the United States. And so they've guided me every step of the way in terms of my knowledge base when it comes to the virus. And we're still learning a lot every single day. But public health has to come always first, and that's how you fix the economy.
Great, thank you. I saw that you have on your website a COVID mask contest for all the mask designers out there. You can check that out on the Congressman's website. Another question from Robert. He's asking, have you noticed any pushback from others with comparison of your bills to the Green New Deal, and how do you navigate through that?
Well, it's interesting, Robert. The Green New Deal was really a statement of values and goals, but it lacked these specific policy prescriptions. I've never seen so much misrepresentation about something, perhaps, certainly no resolution. I read it and double checked. There's nothing in there about eliminating cows or, hamburgers or eliminating airplanes. I mean, back before COVID, sometimes I used to like to actually eat a hamburger on an airplane. So I don't think we are advocating for eliminating either. But it was an important set of values, but it requires details. And you can think of our select committee report as the Green New Details, the 500 pages of specific legislation in all areas that will actually help us get where we need to go in a manner commensurate with the science. And I was very happy that the Biden climate plan that we saw maybe 3 weeks ago, a month ago, and the Senate plan that we just saw a couple days ago, very consistent with what we outlined in the House plan. So what this tells me, if you're someone that is concerned about the future of our planet is on the ballot in 70 days. Whether or not we look at climate change as a hoax, or whether or not we look at climate change as a huge challenge, but also an amazing opportunity for us to, again, transform and accelerate our economy and our energy sector to more sustainable sources of energy, more sustainable agriculture, how we move people, how we move goods, all of that is on the ballot in 70 days. So I'm actually very optimistic that if we are able to keep the House, win back the White House, and particularly if we take the Senate, and if the Senate, so the other big thing here is if the Senate keeps the filibuster in place, then you need 60 votes. If they eliminate the filibuster, you need 50 votes. I am not telling the Senate what to do. I don't think that's my place as a member of the House. President Obama then the other night did, though. during the services for my friend, the great John Lewis, said the filibuster was antiquated. But the reason why that's so important is that if the filibuster is in place, then we're going to have to be limited to those things you can do via budget reconciliation. So that's a much smaller bucket of things than if they eliminate it, and if you need only a bare majority of 51, then we're off to the races in terms of the possibilities of things that we might be able to do. But I want to emphasize, we hear so much about the costs of doing these things, the costs of transitioning to a more sustainable tomorrow, but we don't talk enough about the costs of doing nothing. And take, for example, Biden's climate plan. They say is going to cost $2 trillion, right? It's a $2 trillion plan. So a very good friend of mine up at Stanford, Marshall Burke, an economist there, he has some work that has been it's peer reviewed and has been published. They believe that doing nothing and allowing the fossil fuel interests to continue to dominate our economic and energy landscape, that will cost us somewhere between $25 to $35 trillion in the decades ahead. So we ought to talk about, to be fair, we ought to talk about the costs of doing nothing, not just the costs of taking action.
Very true. All right, we have a question from your former supervisor, or at least placement supervisor, David Abel.
Oh my gosh.
You candidly shared that you are a member of the Progressive Caucus. My question is there still room for radical centrists in Congress?
There's always room for David. That much I know. But yeah, I would like to believe, David, that radical centrism is alive and well in Congress. I think that the reality is we'll see after the election if Trump wins re-election, there are so many Republicans that are so beholden to Trump and Trumpism, whether out of fear or whether out of actual ideological commitment is, I'm sure there's some of both. Trump has not wanted to work with Democrats. He has been steadfast in trying to appease the base of the GOP. Take, for example, this COVID relief. We want to meet them halfway. We have said as much, that we will meet them halfway, but they are just steadfast in that absolutism. So the reason I bring this up is I think the election results, if Biden wins and wins big, and if we win the Senate, and if we grow our majority in the House, then I think you'll see a lot more Republican members of Congress, I hope anyway, and Democratic members of Congress wanting to work together, because that starts from the top. And Joe Biden has a long track record of successfully working across the aisle to get results to the American people. And at the end of the day, that's what we need. We need to work together. And so I think there is a lot of room. And that's, for me, that's a big reason why I wanted to do this, is to be able to work across the aisle. Now, one area where we have done it is my work for veterans. So that is a committee where I chair one of the subcommittees for what's called Veterans Economic Opportunity, with jurisdiction over things like veterans housing, homelessness, the GI Bill, workforce development, transition assistance from active duty service into the workforce. And we have passed in the House 10 bipartisan bills that I've been a lead on. 4 of them have become law. So those 4 bills that I helped to author that have become law, I think is the most of any freshman. And I'm really proud of that. And in fact, tomorrow morning, we're doing an event with a Zoom event, of course, with one of the bills is named the Ryan Cools Act, and Ryan Cools will be joining us. It's to expand the specially adapted housing grants so that more veterans who are service disabled, have a service-connected disability, will be able to retrofit their homes, retrofit their cars, to be able to transition better into civilian life. So I'm very, very proud of that work. I think it's an example of what we can do when we push the partisanship aside and just focus on results for the people that we're trying to serve. And I hope we can do a lot more of that in the Biden administration than we've been able to do in a Trump administration.
That's amazing. 4 bills. That's great. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Mark has a question that's similar, building on the spirit of bipartisanship. He's asking, and building on what you mentioned earlier, potentially getting rid of the filibuster, what procedural reforms are necessary to effectively move the needle on governing in an increasingly intransient Congress? How do we actually bring people together in a Coro-esque way to get things done?
I think the biggest thing that we need to do is reform the campaign finance system. The current campaign finance system, you look at it and you say, how is it that Congress, when you've got 80% of American people that want to see action on preventing gun violence, you have 95% that want to see universal background checks. You've got 65, 70% of the United States wants to see bold, comprehensive measures on climate. Why is it that Congress can't reflect the will of the American people? And the answer is pretty simple. It's the hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars that are being spent in direct contributions and in dark money by the fossil fuel industry and by the gun lobby on those two specific interests. Now, at the beginning of the 116th Congress, we introduced H.R. 1, the For the People Act. It was the first thing that we did as the 116th Congress. That bill would go a long way towards cleaning up our system. The transparency and accountability, getting that dark money out of politics. I'm proud to be one of about 60 members of Congress that do not take any corporate PAC money. But if I'm one of 60 that don't take it, there are 375 that do take it. Now, I've looked at this specifically through the lens of energy and environmental policy, because I have wondered, how is it that Congress has been so far behind on being so beholden to fossil fuels? And I go back and I look at a legacy of bipartisanship on the environment, and then I look at what's happening today with the EPA, the Department of Energy, the Department of Interior, where they are literally run by the fossil fuel industry. And I say, how is this possible? When you go back to the creation of the EPA, Nixon was president. You go to the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, broad bipartisan support, on into dealing with acid rain through cap and trade when George H.W. Bush was president. California getting its waiver under the Federal Clean Air Act, Ronald Reagan was governor, Richard Nixon was president. Then AB 32, Arnold Schwarzenegger was governor. So then around 2010, things got haywire. What happened in 2010? Citizens United was decided by the Supreme Court. And subsequent to Citizens United, the fossil fuel industry has put over $300 million in to campaigns. And that's in addition to the $80 to $100 million in lobbying that they do each year. And it's like Senator Warren, Elizabeth Warren said, I think exactly right. They could have invested in research and development. Instead, they invested in politicians and campaigns. And so that's the logjam there. Just the same with the NRA and the gun lobby. They've invested maybe $200 million since 2010. And that's not counting perhaps some of that dark money that we don't even know about. So look, check out H.R. 1, the For the People Act. I think it's the best thing we could do. And then we have to also uphold voting rights. That was part of H.R. 1, but we reintroduced it as H.R. 4, and then we renamed it the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act to restore the actual intent of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that John practically died for. I had the great opportunity in 2019 to go to Selma, Birmingham, and Montgomery with John, cross the Pettus Bridge with him. Really an unbelievable, unforgettable experience. He was just an amazing man. And now we sent that bill, the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act, to McConnell. McConnell won't act on it. And if he really wanted to honor the life and legacy of John Lewis, he would act on it. So that's another thing, is to make sure that people who are eligible to vote can actually vote, particularly when you got the President of the United States and some who are trying to suppress or disenfranchise.
Speaking of voting, there's a question from Renee about mail-in voting and mail-in ballots, and how do we ensure nationwide, with so many different systems and so many different inputs, a safe election free of fraud?
Well, the good news is that our election is very decentralized. The bad news is that our election is very decentralized. What I worry about is people who put their ballot in the mail on time, where it's supposed to be counted by law of that state. Like in California, you can, as long as it's postmarked by the election day, you're fine. But then it's not counted for weeks because of the COVID impact on polling places and the workers who count those ballots. I'm not as worried about it in California, but I am worried about it, particularly in those swing states. And what I could foresee is that Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Florida, North Carolina, Arizona, where you don't have Alex Padilla as the Secretary of State. I don't know who you have in some of those states. But what you could have is a scenario, just the statistics are that 63% of the Biden voters say they're going to vote by mail. 74% of the Trump voters say they're going to vote in person. And a lot of our voters, Democratic, I say our voters, the Democratic voters, they tend to vote their absentee ballots late, particularly because this ballot, we haven't seen what's going to exactly be on it, but I presume there's going to be a lot of things on it throughout the country, judges, propositions, initiatives, things, that people are going to have to research. And so I worry that on election night, you could have a scenario where Trump declares victory, and then where Trump tries to invalidate the result of a Biden victory that would come through mail-in voting. I worry about that a lot. I haven't thought of the solution yet. Now, the interesting thing was the other day, or yesterday, Jim Jordan, during that hearing with DeJoy in the Oversight Committee, he said, he flipped it around. He said those Democrats are going to try to invalidate a Trump victory on election night and then wait 4 or 5, 6 weeks, however long it takes until Biden wins. So it's pretty easy to see that's where this may be headed. And that's, number one, we got to vote early. Okay, so get your ballot in. My birthday is October 20. Try to get your ballot in by my birthday. That's all I want for my birthday. It's also Kamala Harris's birthday, by the way. And we need all the ballots that we can get in by then. And then number two, I would love it if we could get some bipartisan consensus around the emergency funding for the Postal Service, which, by the way, that $25 billion that we had in our bill over the weekend, that is what Trump's Postal Service Board of Governors said they needed. That was back in April before DeJoy took over. And I want everybody to know one other thing about the Postal Service. The challenges of the Postal Service in terms of their long-term fiscal problems really were accelerated in 2007 when Congress passed a bill signed into law by George W. Bush, capping some of the revenues of the USPS and dramatically increasing the pension liabilities, where they had to have 75 years of prepaid pension liabilities. And ever since then, they've run a huge deficit. At the end of the day, it's called the Postal Service. This is a service that we must provide to the American people. It actually predates the Constitution. And they want to privatize it. Some people want to privatize it, and they shouldn't want to privatize it. We've got to make sure that our Postal Service is functioning. It delivers 48% of the world's mail, of the entire world's mail. And looking at it through the lens of veterans, 330,000 veterans a day get a prescription from the U.S. Postal Service. 120 million prescriptions a year mailed through the U.S. Postal Service. So, not so good. Not so, long answer, Jenny. You could probably tell it's been on my mind.
Indeed. Very importantly, yes. So another important topic, we have vaccines. A couple of folks have asked about vaccines. What's the current status of COVID vaccine? How do we get it out to people? And is there too much emphasis on vaccines at this point versus prevention?
I think you've got to be very aggressive about both prevention and the development of a vaccine. And we've invested, as I said, $8 billion all the way back in March was that initial investment. Now, Operation Warp Speed, named because I guess one of the people heading it enjoys Star Trek, what it is designed to do is you give billions of dollars to several different companies, or hundreds of millions to several different companies, to not only develop a vaccine, but also to mass produce it before it is designated as effective. Before that phase 3 trial is done showing that it is safe and effective, you've got enough doses of it where you can actually distribute it at scale. That's the bet. It's never been done before. But make no mistake, we've got to go through phase 2, phase 3 on most of these vaccines. Some of them are from companies that have never made a successful vaccine ever for anything. But the development of a vaccine is really, really critical, particularly because the lack of really solid treatment. Now, remdesivir, we know, helps. There's a lot of dispute, frankly, about convalescent plasma since the president's announcement from those at the FDA about the true efficacy and questioning that 35% number that that Hahn, the FDA director, came out with. So I want to see all about that. But what I hope it's not is another hydroxychloroquine debacle. But look, the vaccine development is critically important. And again, I trust Dr. Fauci and Dr. Fauci and the others at CDC and NIH, who are doing, I think, a good job, not focused on politics. I'm more worried about HHS under Azar. And I was happy to see the CDC take back the data reporting from HHS. Treatment versus vaccine, it's not an either or, it's both as quickly as possible.
Okay, one last question. We've hit on many of the 4 crises. This one's just a little bit different. Once you got to Washington, D.C. and you were elected, what surprised you the most? This is from Lisa.
What surprised? Well, it was really cold, but I kind of expected that. I think the collegiality. I guess I had in my mind, I probably thought it would be more like House of Cards than it is. Most of my colleagues are just trying their best to represent their districts, and we get along quite well. I get along with a lot of my colleagues across the aisle. I've formed friendships and connections with people from all different backgrounds, all different parts of the country. And the House of Representatives as an institution, what an amazing mosaic it is, and what an amazing reflection of the diversity of this country. And I would like to think that we are so much better than some of the pettiness that we've seen, the name calling, the insults, and I hope that we can get past this period where everyone is yelling at each other on Twitter and focus again on trying to improve the lives and the livelihoods of the American people. So I think it really has been a phenomenal experience, and it requires a lot of sacrifice in terms of being away from, in my case, 2 young kids, my wonderful wife, who really is a saint walking on earth, to be able to help keep the trains running on time. And then I'm constantly reminded in my interactions with our service members and their families and our veterans that my service and my sacrifice pales in comparison to what they've done. And so it's been a humbling, incredible first term. Can't wait to get through Election Day and get all the votes counted, feel very good about it, and then hopefully be able to serve for a long time.
Well, thank you. That's a very positive and uplifting note to land on. We thank you so much, Congressman Levin, for your time today, sharing a few of your insights and hearing a little bit about what's behind the scenes of what we're seeing in the headlines and on television. We certainly appreciate everybody joining us today for our Leadership and Resilience in Times of Uncertainty webinar. And we look forward to seeing everybody again for our next program in this series in September, actually Thursday, September 10th. We have Peter Taylor, president of the ECMC Foundation and member of the Board of Trustees for the California State University program. You can find more details if you're interested in RSVPing for the next installment of our virtual series at corola.org/virtual series. And another public service announcement, Coro is now accepting applications for our fall 2020 Women in Leadership cohort. Women in Leadership supports the leadership development of women, establishing a pipeline for professional advancement and creating a cross-sector network of women who support each other's leadership development. And this fall, Coro Southern California is facilitating 2 cohorts. One actually open to all of Southern California, Ventura County, San Diego County, and everything in between, as well as one national cohort. And you're welcome to find out more about that on our website again, corola.org/WIL. And as a reminder, we certainly love feedback and constructive critique at Coro. So when you sign off, you will be prompted to take a short survey about today's session. Please send us feedback so we can keep improving these programs and make them as relevant as possible to our entire Coro community. And if you somehow missed the survey today, don't worry, we'll send you an email follow-up so you'll have plenty of time to respond. Thank you everybody again for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at the next one and have a very lovely evening.